This very thing occurred after an enormous increase in the risk that was offered by the central bank in the United States. In 1980, the Monetary Control Act was passed to increase by 10 times the guarantees for deposits in banks. And many institutions shifted their money from sound investment into risky investments. So this chart shows the list of, or the number of bank failures that occurred in the late 1980s as a result of this moral hazard. This is hundreds of banks that failed as a result of the new moral hazard. Did the central banks, did the government learn from this mistake? No. They did more of it in a bigger way, even in other countries. The Monetary Control Act authorized the Federal Reserve Board to guarantee money internationally. This chart shows that the same application of guarantees from government institutions like the IMF, the G20, and the Federal Reserve Board also encourage money to go from secure countries to risky countries. So we had bailouts in Mexico, Russia, Brazil, Asia. Okay, next one. And now we have our current bailout. Everybody is clamoring for the government to do something. For doctors, the advice is first, do no harm. For Keynesian economists is first, do more harm. The idea is we have created this problem with too much bad debt, so we will solve this problem with much, much more debt. It is like saying to a patient, you are very obese and you have heart trouble. We will cure this with a whole bucket full of fat. My friend Robert Poole says it is like treating a patient who needs a blood transfusion by taking blood out of the right arm and putting it into the left arm and spilling half of the blood on the ground. Now, what motivates these politicians to do this? Next. It is not a small amount of money, it is an enormous amount of money. Last November, they estimated the cost would be over $8 trillion. So this is now compared to the cost of many other programs that the government has had. NASA, the space program, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and all of these other crises don't even amount to half of the expected bailout. And this was last November. Since then, it has grown much greater. To put it in another way, in inflation-adjusted dollars, it is twice as much as the entire cost of World War II. Now, as in every war, the government grows, and the power of politicians grows right along with it. In order to get public approval of such a massive expenditure, they have to be driven to the sense of panic and fear, as if this was a war. Yes. Oh. Ah, good. Okay. I forgot to introduce my daughter. She really should be giving this talk. She knows it better than I do. She is studying economics at the University of Buckingham in England. And what other daughter would spend her spring break with her father giving economics lectures? And this is my brother from Vilnius, Virgis Daukas, who came. He is really quite a hero in Lithuania. He founded the Lithuanian Free Market Institute and a liberal party. And he's had television shows. He's a great champion of liberty in Lithuania. Now let me ask a question. I just want to stir the blood and get you to participate in a question. The question is this. Do you trust the campaign promises of politicians? Okay, first let me ask those who say, now this is generally speaking, not some one person, but generally speaking, how many people say, yes, I do trust the campaign promises of politicians? How many say, no, I do not trust the campaign promises of politicians? Now, sure, there are some who feel agreeable, but most generally do not. And let me ask this. Do politicians, generally speaking, have higher moral standards than your own or lower moral standards than your own? How many people say politicians generally have higher moral standards than my own? How many people say politicians generally have lower moral standards than my own? Well, this skepticism is often shared by Americans as well. This survey of the honesty and ethical standards of people in different professions shows that the politicians rank, well, rather low, just slightly above prostitutes and car salesmen. If this is true, that there isn't a good basis or there's a good reason to be skeptical of the ethical standards of politicians, why do we trust them with so much money? It's so often during the fear of a war that people turn over great power to someone who says they have the solution. Now let's see, how are these industries in the United States influencing the decision makers? This is the 2008 campaign contributions by industry, and the #1 industry is finance, insurance, and real estate. They have contributed, just last year, almost $500 million to the political campaigns, equally to Democrats and Republicans. Not to all candidates, but to candidates they can be assured will give them all the money they need. Most people don't know, even in America, most people don't know that there were many people running for president, because the only two they heard from were the two that had the money to tell them that the bailout was necessary. None of the others would have supported this current bailout. Now let's take a look at the contributions by company. For one example, let's take Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, the chairman of the CEO of Goldman Sachs was Robert Rubin, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury under Clinton. He was the CEO of Goldman Sachs was the Secretary of the Treasury under Clinton. Henry Paulson, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, became the Secretary of Treasury under George Bush. When Alan Greenspan retired as the chairman of the Board of Governors of the Central Bank, when he retired as chairman of the Central Bank, the next week he made a conference call for 20 minutes with Goldman Sachs, and for 20 minutes of advice he was paid $120,000. I consider these deferred bribes. Okay, here we have the amount of money that they made in contributions, and here is the amount of money they received in the bailout. We have in America what's called the Iron Triangle, where financial institutions contribute to politicians. Politicians set up government agencies to give bailouts. This money comes from the pockets of taxpayers. Now, investors know a good investment when they see it. Investment companies know how to see a good investment. For every dollar of campaign contributions, they received $2,600 in bailout money. There is no better investment in the world than a well-placed politician. And if you're worried about supporting the wrong candidate, well, support both of them. How could you lose?